Hi, it's Jeff at Slavens Racing. This video is about how to change fork springs on open chamber WP forks. And open chamber forks have been around the longest on KTMs, and they're on a lot of models, primarily XCW and EXC models. They also are on the 690 Enduros and 950 and 990 Adventures. And the way you can tell if you have an open chamber fork, or at least a later model open chamber fork, is if they have 4 holes. So if there's 4 holes in the cap, that's an open chamber fork, and it requires this tool, the 4-pin tool, that fits in those holes. Now the first thing you need to do is, if you have a bleeder, an air bleeder, speed bleed button on there, remove that. Just set it aside. I've already loosened this cap up, just to speed up this video, but we sell these 4-pin tools. I think they're $22.95. Excellent tool. And you put that in there, and of course you can put the ratchet on it and unscrew it. And at that point, you can just push the outer tube. This is the outer tube. Push it all the way down. There, the spring is exposed. And from there, you're going to need a 22mm open-end wrench. And you'll have to, most of them, you'll have to grind the sides of it to make it thin enough to fit in here. So down here, you might want to squat down a little bit, is you just pull the spring down. So hold onto the cap and pull on the spring. And then just keep pushing down the spring and slide your wrench into here. From there, you remove the 4-pin tool, and you'll need a 24mm wrench or socket on this part of the fork cap. So the 4-pin tool fit out here, that takes the cap out, but do not use that to remove the cap from the spindle. You need to do that here. If you use the tool, the 4-pin tool, to remove the cap, you'll jam the outer part of the cap up against this preload adjuster, and it'll be a real booger to get it to release. So put your wrench on here, or a socket, or the box end part of it, and unscrew that. Once you've got it loose, you can just spin the cap off. Leave this wrench in here. And when I get out to the end here, sometimes they'll be kind of stuck feeling. Just put your wrench on there and continue on. That's your preload spacer. You can just put it back in the cap. And then just push down on the spring, remove the wrench, let the spring come up, and just slide the spring up a ways and just let it sit there for a couple minutes until the oil drips off of it. Now go ahead and slide the spring out. This piece is called a spring guide. We've got a separate video on this. On some of the real big springs, like for the 990s and stuff, big, really heavy-duty springs, sometimes, usually not very often with our spring, but sometimes you'll have to machine this down a little bit to make the spring slide over it. This is called a spring guide. It's got a hydraulic stop on it here, but this part of it is nothing more than a guide for the spring. That's all it does. So take your new spring. You can see here that I'm using my finger to hold the spindle. If you let loose of the spindle, then it will just slide down. So just pull this. This is the spindle. Pull the spindle all the way up. But before you get to that point, make sure you've got a lot of threads exposed here. I don't know how many there are. Let me measure that real quick for you. So it looks like there's about 25mm, so 1 inch of threads exposed. And the reason that is important is if this thing is screwed, has worked its way up to where it's way up here, when you put the cap on, the cap won't bottom onto the spindle, and then the rebound adjuster won't work. So the cap has to be fully bottomed onto the spindle for the rebound adjuster to work. Alright, so at this point, hold on to the spindle right here. Slide the spring down until it hits your finger, and then remove your finger and let the spring go down, and then push the spring over against the spring guide just to bind it up so the spindle can't go down. Then you can reach in here and grab the spindle and pull down on the spring and put the cap back on. So right there, the cap bottomed against the spindle. And now the spindle is going to turn. So it's time to put the wrench on it. Got the wrench on there. Now this can be tightened. I don't know the torque spec on that. For you torqueaholics, you can look it up in your manual. I don't ever torque them. Then you just slide the outer tube up to the cap, screw the cap down, then use your 4-pin tool and tighten it down. That's all there is to it. That's all for now.